Hey, everybody. Hope your day has been well. Welcome to another episode, if you will, of Wellness Wednesdays. I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight. If you have been here before, you know how we roll. So as you're coming on in, let me know where you're chiming in from, city and state. And then also, I want you to share this broadcast. If you have a friend, a coworker, your mommy and daddy, your cousin, Pookie, all them. Uh, Seriously, if you know this conversation that we're going to have tonight is going to be beneficial, I'll definitely love you to share that with people that you care about, that you know will benefit from this conversation. Have a little bit of a lag there. Awesome. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so again, thank you so much for chiming in tonight. Um, if you have not been on a Wellness Wednesdays broadcast before, my name is James Perkins. I am a professional counselor and coach, and I love what I do. Love helping people. Got tongue twisted there in their journey and helping them to becoming more of who God has called them to be. So I'm going to share my video as well on tonight. Awesome. So again, yes, as you're coming on in, let me know where you're chiming in from. Uh, I would love to shout you out. Hey, babe. Awesome. And we'll get started here shortly. Awesome. Great. Thank you so very much again for tuning in. Let me know in the comments where you're chiming in from, city and state. We're going to have a great conversation tonight. I have a great guest and dear brother of mine. Tonight, we're going to be talking about men, vulnerability, and shame. It's a very important conversation I want to have. June is actually Mental Health Month for men across the nation, across the world, really. And so I think what we have to say tonight is going to be really beneficial to you. As we are having this conversation, I want you to do a couple of things for me. One is obviously listen intently, but then also if you have questions, drop them in the comments on tonight. And so we'll have time at the end to answer your questions. So as we're going, just go ahead and drop your questions. We may pause and take a couple of questions so they're really pertinent. But we definitely want to have an engaging dialogue and conversation on tonight. So Wellness Wednesdays, again, is a broadcast that we created to help promote mental and emotional wellness. And what I mean by that is mental and emotional wellness is really our ability to understand how our emotions and thoughts impact our decisions. And in order for us to really understand ourselves, we need to get a really good grasp of our thoughts and emotions because all decisions that we make are impacted by how we feel and what we think. And so if you can improve the quality of your thoughts and improve your ability to be self-aware, that definitely helps you out in becoming one of the more authentic version of who God has created you to be, but also to accomplish your goals and dreams. And so tonight we're going to have a great conversation. I have my dear brother Kenny Wilson to join me tonight. He's a motivational speaker, but I'm not going to do the introduction, if you will, for him. I'm going to bring him on now and let him introduce himself. Kenny, brother, how are you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing well, my friend. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. And people don't know how much history we have, but we have a lot of history, probably too much to recount on one broadcast tonight. But we go way back since grad school. Um, Man, we switched our majors. I can't believe that. Switched our majors. And it definitely was God's providence and how we met. And so, not. I'm glad you're here. I want to say that first. I'm glad you're here. Um, Glad we're going to have this conversation tonight. And so, if you will, man, just give us an introduction to who you are and the work that you do, brother.
Sure, man. I'm KD Wilson. I'm a student success and educator empowerment speaker. I travel the country whenever we're not dealing with pandemics,
Yeah. Yeah.
really unlocking and empowering educators and scholars, man, to become the very best version of themselves they can be by way of speeches, seminars, you name it, and we do it.
Awesome, man. I am just to see your journey, man, has been like phenomenal. Um, Kenny is a retired policeman. He transitioned from being a policeman to really stepping more fully into the work uh, God has called him to do. And but he's always loved helping people, and I can see that so easily from the time that we met up until now. And so I thought I was like, man, who can I have this conversation with to talk about uh, men and vulnerability? Because I think it's a very important conversation, and really only men who are secure and understand that vulnerability is a good thing um, would would really see the benefit of this conversation.
Absolutely.
And hopefully, if you're listening and you're not for sure if this vulnerability thing is for you, hopefully you'll be convinced that it is by the end of our conversation tonight. So again, thanks everybody for coming on in. Even if you listen to this by replay, let us know where you're chiming in from. Please share this with your friends, family, your dog, cat, anybody who has ears. This conversation is going to benefit them. And then also drop your questions in below as we're having a conversation on tonight. And so I want to set the stage and really define what I mean by vulnerability. And I couldn't think of a better person um, to give us a more useful definition, if you will, than Brene Brown. And she defines very simply vulnerability as your willingness to be seen. So vulnerability is very simply your willingness to be seen. And so I want to first start by just asking Kenny, because we're in a culture and a society where, at least for men, vulnerability is not always a high priority. So I just
Right.
want to begin by asking you, you know, why do you think that is?
Man, honestly, I think we're taught to suffer in secret.
Man,
Um, I think we're taught to suffer in secret because
true.
we are we are really kind of picked up and conditioned from about the age 4 up, to be strong, to be tough, to man up, to suck it up, But I think oftentimes we're not given a balance of what that should look like, where you're allowed to cry, where you're allowed to feel pain, where you're allowed to fail, and it's okay because at least you tried. Um, and now I think that even as time continues on, even looking at technology and social media and things, now those relationships that we actually needed are growing further and further apart because
Mm,
we're talking this way because we live in two different cities, but you have people that live right next door, that do this. We have people that are downstairs, in the same
yeah.
house and do this. Um,
Mm,
so I think that ties back into relationship as well. Do we have people in our lives that are going to show us what it looks like to be? I guess one person put it, how can we want to teach men how to remain, positively assertive but not aggressive, you
wow.
know, um, because you can be positive and you can have confidence without being cocky and arrogant. Um, but at the same time, I've never seen a true leader that wasn't willing to be vulnerable.
Wow.
And I think a lot of people miss that. They look at Navy SEALs, they look at all these different people that think the biggest, baddest, toughest people, but those are the people that are willing to be vulnerable. You know,
Yeah.
a Navy SEAL, for instance, has to be willing to go through that door, knowing that something on the other side might take their life. But
Absolutely.
they're willing to go first to save the lives of those behind them. That's vulnerability. You're opening yourself up to, like Brene Brown said, you're willing to be seen, even if who and what you're being seen by is in opposition of what you're trying to do. So I mean, I could go on, but to answer your question in short, I think that a lot of it is conditioning. I think it's trauma. I think it's fear. And I think some of it are just insecurities that we've either built on our own by looking at what the rest of the world's doing. And sometimes it's just a matter of not defining ourselves as God defines us.
Man, yeah, so we're going to unpack that because you just dropped a whole bunch of bombs in a short span of time. I definitely agree with you. The first thing you said, we're taught to suffer in secret. And, one of the things I think that was important about what you said, which was absolutely accurate, is that, can't remember who said it, but, men often crash on the inside before they ever crash on the outside. And
Absolutely.
and so we see, especially for this month specifically, that, or not this month specifically, but in general, just from statistics, how significant depression is amongst men. And a big part of that is, we've pushed down our emotions, we're not processing them. And as I always say, unprocessed emotions, they don't die. They just leak into other areas of our
Come
life.
on.
And so let's talk a little bit about this modeling because I think this is probably a really significant portion that you just glazed over, but it was so powerful. And that modeling is so important, and we get our models obviously mostly from our parents. So just kind of have you unpack that a little bit more about models and how models really impact men as it relates to this whole issue of vulnerability.
Absolutely. Again, like I said, man, from the time we're kids, we're looking at cartoons, we're looking at magazines, we're listening to music, where we are always looking for something to see, how should I do this? How should I operate? I have three children. I have a 5-year-old girl, I have a 3-year-old boy, and a 9.5-month-old little boy. And my 9.5-month-old little boy is looking at me right now. He's mirroring the things that I do. So when I clap my hands, he claps his hands. But what happens when I do this number? What happens when I scream and I point and I yell? At 9.5 months, he's learning those same things. He's mirroring those things. So what happens when you fall off the swing set? What happens when you scrape your knee, or you don't get the grade that you wanted on your test, or somebody tells you that you're ugly, or that you're not smart, or you don't fit in? I
Mm,
think if we don't have somebody to help us, like you said, unpack, process, and balance those feelings and emotions, and not just simply shoo them away as
yeah,
being weak or feminine or soft, then we end up internalizing those things and it becomes toxic.
yeah,
And as we know, anything that becomes toxic is going to become deadly and it's going to kill you.
yeah,
And like you said, not sugarcoating it, for men, it's literally killing us. If you
yeah,
look at suicide rates and depression rates and anxiety, and anxiety statistics for men, they're through the roof, but it's because we internalize and hold everything. And some of it does come back down to trust, but
mhm,
ultimately we have to have some people in our lives that help us process those things in a healthy manner. And I think that for those of us that grew up maybe in single parent households like I did, whether it was your mother or your father, but particularly those of us that grew up with our mothers only, there's only but so far,
yeah,
that she can take you. There's only but so much that you can learn about what it means to be a man and how to go through things, from your mom. And it's not a knock on
yeah,
them. It's the same thing of, there's only but so much I can do for my daughter. Some things
yeah,
my wife has to be able to explain. But I can't stress enough, man, that if we don't have healthy, strong men in our lives, and I'll define strong in a little while, then I think it starts to set us up for failure.
yeah. Man, so there's this grid that I always walk my clients through and want to get your intake and put on it. And so I always share how that we, both male and female, when we're early, we all need three basic needs: attention, affirmation, and affection.
Absolutely.
Primarily from our primary caregivers. And so, affection are those uh, public or not public, but displays of non-sexual touch, like hugging, kissing, things of that
Hmm.
nature.
Hmm.
Um, affirmation are those words that affirm your worth and value, your contribution. So things like "I'm proud of you." I believe that what you have to offer is important, um, and I believe you want to make something of yourself one day. And then you have attention. And as I always explain this, I always ask people, how do you feel when somebody shows you attention? And it was like, I feel important. And it was like, yep, it's really important for a child to feel like their value, that their presence matters. And so ideally, if we get all these needs met, which for some of us, we either get some of them met or not, or none of them met, or maybe just one. What it
Hmm.
does is it sets you up to have realistic expectations um, of how to get those needs met in other relationships. But for a mass majority of individuals, we're deficient in those areas, so we try to compensate in other ways. And so the question I want to ask you about is, if we were just thinking about your own upbringing and experience as it relates to attention, affirmation, and affection, what was your experience like with those three needs if they got met for you, and how do you think that impacted your vulnerability early on and even up until now?
Oh man, that's a book in and of itself. But
Yeah.
I'll say in somewhat short, I grew up on a Marine Corps base. So
Mm,
I literally was born on a Marine Corps base. So I came to be, around bold, strong, both men and women.
yeah.
My mom is, Southern Belle, but she was a bodybuilder when she had me. My dad's,
Wow.
6 foot 6.5 inches tall, and he came from some rough areas, man. He made it out, so I come from, I would say, resilience. Um, but in and of that, uh, that can be counterproductive,
Yeah.
when you're trying to teach someone um, nurture,
Mm,
and that's definitely something that has to come about. So for me, man, just growing up in the Marine Corps, there are things about it I loved. I love seeing the discipline. I love seeing the uniformity. I love seeing those different things. But I noticed that it was oftentimes, yelling to get something done, or it was aggression.
yeah.
Um, and I remember just being a kid, kind of seeing that, like, okay, well, obviously that's the way that things are done. And my family, both directly and indirectly, has kind of struggled with alcoholism and
Mm,
alcohol abuse and different things, but verbal abuse, neglect, things like that.
yeah.
So for me, I think once my parents decided to go their separate ways, um, I found myself in a very, very compromised position. Things weren't great growing up from the jump. There were definitely people that had it way worse than me, and there's a lot of people that had it better. It's not a big comparison thing, but just to say, for my personal journey, I remember being in the first place, which was in Michigan. That was the first place that we'd ever been where we weren't stationed somewhere. And I
Wow.
just started to really develop, into the young man that I want to be. For me, my faith was important, man. So I was in church, and I was also doing martial arts. I was at the skating rink, tearing up the floors, every Friday. If you name it, we were fishing, you name it, I was into it, man. I was full blown boy, and all of a sudden that was torn away. Once they went their separate ways, and we drove 14 hours through the night to come to North Carolina. And my very first week, I went to a new school here, and that's when the bullying started. And with a bunch of kids I didn't know, I didn't have any friends, I didn't have any support. Your parents are going through their own stuff, so you're not trying to be a burden. It's just like Karate Kid. If you watched that
Yeah.
movie, where he was just holding things into himself, but he was just getting, pushed around, having to deal with all this kind of stuff on his own.
Mm,
And, for me, I was always a confident and strong kid. until my identity was shifted. And when my
Wow.
identity shifted away from the things that I was accustomed to, I was put into a new environment where I was being challenged, and I wasn't receiving affirmation. I was receiving degradation, if anything.
Yeah.
Um, then my that wall started to build up. And not only did the wall build up, my vulnerability came back. And where before, I might hug a friend. Hey man, it's all right, man. You'll get through it. Now, like a lot of kids, and I'm not gonna get off topic, but a lot of kids that grow up in poverty-stricken neighborhoods, a lot of kids that grow up, in areas where violence and criminality might be high. They don't have this. They don't have the safe space to be able to grow into themselves. They have to put up these defense mechanisms just to survive. And
Yeah.
I had a half of what a lot of kids go through every single day. You
Wow.
know, um, but that pushed me into anxiety, man, to the point where I had stomach ulcers. I stopped eating. I was depressed. I was never suicidal, but I did not care if I woke up the next day or not. You
Wow.
know, um, so it's amazing how something can be great, 1 month, and the very next month you're in the bottomless pit and you don't think anybody can hear or see you.
Wow.
So for me, it was a roller coaster, and it took me growing back up into those things, learning to rebuild myself, stand up for myself, um, in different areas, not just in school, but in academics, with teachers that told me that, you're not smart enough to go to college, different things like that, man. So I think
Yeah.
you hit it on the head that we need that attention. We need that affirmation. What was the other one that you said? Sorry.
Affection, attention,
And we need,
affirmation, affection.
and we most certainly need affection, man.
Yeah.
And those were the three things that were partially there, and then they were all stripped away.
Wow.
So I had to grow up into that. So when I came into my high school age, when I was coming into the time when you really need to have those things balanced out, mine
Yes.
were at an all-time low. Mine were at an all-time
Wow.
low. I was more mature and more emotionally stable as a child than I was when I was in high school.
Wow.
So I went down instead of up.
Yeah.
And it took an act of God, man, to get that thing to turn back around. And even
Yeah.
to this day, I'm still having to work out the kinks of having to fend for myself.
Yeah.
Because whenever a man opens up his heart, whenever a man trusts someone and they shut him
Mhm.
down, you can expect an ironclad wall to be built. Um, and
Stonewalling is
that
important.
that thing ain't coming down for a long time until trust is restored. And he has to be willing to open himself back up to that thing again, which is the only
Yeah.
way to move forward. But nonetheless, man, I think that as men right now, we're like I said, we're killing ourselves. And like I said the other day in one of my posts, we have to learn to encourage one another, because sometimes you're not going to have that father figure. You know,
Mm.
the fact that you said, "Hey, Katie, will you come on this and share your experience, with us?" Yes, I will. You're showing me attention right now. This is
Yeah.
building me up. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's your brother that will pick you up. Maybe your father's not
Yes.
there. Maybe your uncle's not there. Maybe your grandparents aren't there. You might be that missing link for the brother standing right next to you.
Man. So you opened up, gave me a couple of thoughts. One, which I thought was very important that you said and made that connection, is that for a lot of men, our sense of or our willingness to be vulnerable is a lot of times tied to our sense of identity,
Right.
and that who we um, if our identity is shaky or unstable, it will impact oftentimes our vulnerability and our willingness to be seen.
Absolutely.
Because it's just wired in our DNA, I think, if you will, that for men, we want to be competent, and we want to do things well. And we get our sense of security and our sense of identity from our competence and knowing where things are going to be. And if that is threatened, then that can impact our ability to just open up, because we're kind of fragile, if you will.
Man, not kind of.
Yeah, fragile.
We are.
We
We
are
are.
fragile beings. Um, and so I thought that was important. Another thing that you said is, rejection. So I think rejection is something that we just deal with as a part of being humans, but
Yep.
especially men. I think we respond to it in different ways, and I think you articulated that very well. That for a lot of men, we um, when we experience rejection, we withdraw, um, and we shut down emotionally. And the interesting about that is that, and you said it so perfectly, like, you're still kind of working out some of those kinks, is that just because you chronologically advance in life, it is not always that I'll say it this way, that our emotional maturity is not always in sync with our chronological age in life. So just because we age in life doesn't mean we're automatically emotionally mature to that same level.
Listen, you're screaming now. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so, and so, ladies, if you're listening, this could be why, you may be having terrible experiences with men because you're looking at his chronological age and you're like, man, he should be mature. And you're dealing with the man on the outside that, yes, is 25, 26, 30, 35, but inside he is still an 8-year old. He is
Man,
still,
listen.
he is having, like you said, and your story just kind of highlights that, is that, you went through this experience and you had everything in 1 month, and then that next month all of it was gone. And like you said, just by the act of God, you were able to rebuild that. But for a lot of men who just were not in those circles, if you will, to regroup, if you will, I just see so many men struggling to reconcile what has happened 10, 12, 15 years ago. And, although on the outside it may appear that they may be successful, on the inside, they're still young men. I'll let you chime in right there, man. I know I love this
Man, listen, you done pull that thing is all the way back.
conversation.
I will say this, and man, if you're listening, you better listen very carefully because I mean this with all of my heart.
Yeah. Hmm.
Men are always concerned with the question, am I good enough?
Wow.
Always, am
Yeah.
I good enough? And
Mm.
that is something that plagues us on a daily basis.
Yep.
From one thing to the next. Am I good enough in my relationship? Am I good enough on my job? Am I good enough in
Mm.
my home? Am I good enough for myself? You know, because we
Yes.
pride ourselves in being able to complete tasks.
Yeah.
We pride ourselves in being able to complete something. And when you have, and I'll just say a young man, because you killed that point, man, that I know so many grown men that are children at heart, and
Yeah.
they are sitting in a corner. They're sitting in the corner of their mind screaming, can anybody hear me?
Can anybody, man?
Can anybody hear me? And they show that through aggression. They show
Hmm.
that through being cold. They show
Yeah.
that through being callous and short and
Hmm.
angry and prideful and bitter, you know, because we
Yeah.
have a lot of wounded men and we don't want to admit that. And the crazy thing is, we don't rationalize, um, we don't rationalize our way of thinking. It's okay for a man to be wounded in war, to come home with all sorts of bruises, and he's battered, and he might have even lost a leg. But it's not okay for a man to be wounded in life and to show
Wow.
anybody his pain. It's not okay in society for men to be wounded by his mother or his father. I'm not justifying, I'm saying it's not okay for us to display our scars, to show what we've been through, you know? And to this day, we still have grown men, including myself at times,
Yeah.
that I find myself asking, where did that come from? You know,
Yeah.
why do I feel so closed in and so cold? People
Yeah.
say, "Well, Katie, man, you're an empowerment speaker. You travel the country, you know, encouraging other people." Yeah, if you ever watch comedians, they have the highest rates of depression and their suicide rates are very high. The
Yes.
people that make you laugh are the ones that are crying the most. And in the same way, the people that are often pushing others to go forward and to be strong are the ones that either are hurting themselves and
Mhm.
they're fueling that thing,
Yeah.
or because they have been through that, they want to amplify their healing into someone else's life.
Yeah.
So man, I would say 100%. We get a lot of wounded guys, and if I could just jump on this real quick, and I'll give it back to
Yeah.
you. I think, and this is just me, but I know I'm right anyway.
Yeah.
With looking at America, particularly our black and brown boys, our
Yeah.
black and brown men, because of systematic oppression, because of all these different contributing factors of
Mhm.
poverty and violence, and drug influences and negative community engagement, those things are ripping our communities apart and have been since the 1500s, not the 1600s, since the 1500s when we
Absolutely.
first showed up here by force. So
Absolutely.
from that very place, I don't think we've ever recovered as men, because the very first thing that were taken from our enslaved ancestors was their identity. They had their manhood stripped from them. They had all the things that made them proud, all the things that made them strong. Those things were ripped and torn away. And I believe that trauma and stress is generational if it's not dealt with, because those things will pass from one kid to the next. Because if my grandfather suffered, my dad's going to suffer. If
Mhm.
my dad suffers, I'm going to suffer. If I suffer and I don't stop that mess, my kid's going to suffer. So man, one of the things you said was such a dead on hit on the nail, that we have a lot of grown men that are kids
Mhm.
at heart that are asking, can anybody hear me?
And how do you expect a child on the inside to raise another child? It's gonna, that child is gonna be lacking in, as I say, that emotional toolbox. And it's really, this is, I think, why I love when I counsel men. Shameless plug, James Perkins out of help. If you're a
Do
man
it.
and you're listening to me, you need to talk. You're like, man, this has hit me different ways. I don't know what I'm feeling, but I just feel something. You need to talk with me. We need to process this. So James Perkins out of help. He talk with me. Let's schedule a call and we'll chat about it. Now back to our regularly scheduled program. And this idea, because just being transparent in my own experience, man, and this is, um, I think, especially for generations, for fathers before us, their aspect of fatherhood, if you will, to some degree was limited, and that was, as long as I'm providing for my family,
Mm,
then I'm doing enough. And so the emotional presence side was lacking. And this is no fault, I think, of their own, because as you were
right.
talking about before, we're all handed models, and the model that we are handed. I love my dad. I think he really tried to improve on it from his own experience with his father, who was a farmer, who was very short on words, and he tried to improve on that. And so uh, to and we worked through some of these dynamics. I remember having a conversation, and this is so funny as a counselor. I remember in grad school, we all have to, each individual had to go through 50 individual sessions of counseling before they finish their program. So it's pretty much, they want to make sure you're not crazy before they let you out and start seeing other people. And so, I'm going through my sessions with my counselor, and this whole, dynamic of my relationship with my father kind of surfaces to the top. And at first, I didn't realize it, but I realized, because we were in a different state. I was in Texas at the time. My, family lived here. I didn't realize how shallow our relationship was to a certain degree, because, when we would talk about surface level things. And guys, I want you to listen to me here.
Hmm.
Uh, Vulnerability is not just sharing surface level things. Vulnerability is sharing things of your heart. When you're opening up your heart to share how you feel, and how you are experiencing your world, that's vulnerability. And so we just didn't have that aspect in a relationship. And so, I was just thinking about that, processing that, like, man, um, the I was processing it really significantly because at this moment, um, in my, I think it was, I just got engaged and was about to get married, and so I was really thinking about, man, I don't want to bring this into my marriage. Like, I know if I don't, get to the root of some of these issues, this can definitely impact my relationship with my wife and inevitably my relationship with, um, my children. And so I had a conversation with my dad. I think he was caught sideways off, and he did. To be honest, when I shared with him just my experience, I don't think he understood. I don't think he processed that. What I was saying is that he was a good father. I was just missing the emotional presence. And so the initial conversation for him, I think what he heard was that he wasn't a good father, and that was because of the model that he was handed, from his father. And what I always say is, even if you have tension or they are relational difficulties, if you will, in your relationship with your caregivers, the reality is that we can only give what we possess. And so, while that is, not a scapegoat to anybody, but inevitably at the end of the day, people can only give you what they have. And so sometimes it is adjusting. We need to adjust our expectations, but that's a whole other conversation about adjusting expectations. But the reality is, like you said, these models that we have that we've been given, if we don't self-assess to ask ourselves these questions of, is the model that I have been given, is it working for me, and is it going to be sustainable? Because
Right.
if you have a model of of a model that does not work for you, and what I mean by work for you, doesn't allow you to open yourself up to um, show people who you are on the inside, then you have an incomplete model. You really have an incomplete model. And like you said, the statistics are, and this is, man, when you talked about comedians, I remember I was so, man, hurt, if you will, when is that Robin Wilson?
Robin Williams.
Robin Williams, when he passed, because just out of the not when he committed suicide, and I was thinking to myself, like, man, this guy has offered so much profound laughter, life changing experiences for people across the country. He's made people laugh, but he couldn't keep himself out of despair. And um, and I think this is the next question I think I want to get into a little bit is our coping mechanisms, because that's really, I think, what we try to do to suffocate that vulnerability is find different ways of coping. Um, I have one question, but I'm going to let you chime in on that, what I had to say, and then I'll give you a question that we have that I would love for you to chime in on as well and answer.
I think you said a lot, man. You said a whole
Yeah.
lot. But just I guess to kind of reprocess one of the things that you kind of went through. Um, I think that, like you said, we're taught different things, and there are some phenomenal men out there. So please, you all, if you're listening, don't think this is a bad session, because it's not. There are some
Yes.
absolutely phenomenal, fathers and mothers that are just crushing the game,
Yes.
and they're raising healthy, strong, brilliant, young men and women. But we're talking about those of us that have had to go through a couple of things and had to kind of
Mm-hmm.
relearn or rewire ourselves, if you will.
Yes.
So I know for me, that conversation with your dad, like you said, was a conversation that I tried to have at one
Mm-hmm.
point in time. And now me and my father are on great terms, but
Yeah.
I'm 30, I'm 36 now. I would say probably, man, between the ages of like 10 and probably 35.
Hmm.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
10 and 35. That's a long
30.
time, y'all. It's a
Yeah.
long time.
Yes.
Just for various reasons. But I remember um, just telling myself, okay, I gotta bring this up. I need to to reach out for some affirmation because the question I need answered is, do you love me? You know,
Mm.
um,
Wow.
that
Wow.
is a
Wow.
question that we don't like to
Mm.
ask. We, granted, you shouldn't have to, but
Yeah.
as a child, it's something that you need to know. If there's
Hmm.
ever, if any of y'all are listening, if you were those kids, if you were one of those kids that used to get in trouble, in school all the time,
Hmm.
if it wasn't you, then you knew somebody that was pushing the teacher's buttons all the time because those teachers were the only consistent form of love and nurture and care that they
Yes.
had. So the
Yes.
moment those teachers turn their eyes away from you, you start acting up. Same way a
Mm.
child does. And it's not to say
Yes.
that you're a child or childish, but we
Hmm.
default back to what's natural to us. And we don't even
Yes.
realize we're doing that. So we do the
Mm.
same thing as men. You were talking about coping mechanisms. We do the same thing as men.
Yep.
Um, giving our spouses or giving our loved ones the cold shoulder, you know.
Mm.
Um, so I'll just cut myself off from you because we want to be chased. And you want to
Wow.
be
Yeah.
chased because you want to be affirmed. If somebody comes after
Mm.
you, that means they care about you. If they
Yeah.
don't, that means that you're on your own.
Whew.
And all the while, we have bricks in our backpack, and they're
Mm.
scheduled to go up at a certain time if somebody doesn't show up. You know,
That's so
and okay, so you didn't want to respond, brick,
great.
brick, brick, and we build that wall.
That's so good, Kitty.
And I would just say, man, that for me, when I approached my dad, and I was like, "Hey, man, um, just want to give you a hug," and his
Mm.
response was, he said, "Get away from me. We don't do that."
Whoa.
And in my late 20s, for me to have
Wow.
had to have worked through all of those emotions just to get to that point,
Man.
only to be destroyed,
Mm.
and which simply reaffirmed that you're not a healthy person for me,
Yeah.
therefore let me re-distance myself from you.
Yeah.
um that's what happened to me. And it's amazing that the same way we have selective hearing and selective listening, we have selective love.
Wow. That's so true, Kitty.
Because for people that have hurt you, for people that have mistreated you, for people that have rejected you or pushed you aside, it could be your spouse, it could be your kids,
Hmm.
it could be you.
Yep.
Um, isn't it amazing that when the right person walks into the room, you'll light up? It's the best
Mm.
thing that ever happened to you, you know?
Yeah.
And as soon as that person leaves and somebody else that reminds you of something or that was directly or indirectly tied to something that caused you
Say it again.
pain, oh, boom, you turn that thing in cold as ice. I ain't got much to say to you. Hey, you seem real. Nah, I'm good. And I
Mm.
said the other day, man, one of my buddies posted it. He said that he said men will I'm good ourselves into depression because again
That's so
we
true.
internalize that thing. I'm good. You are. I'm good. I'm
Man.
straight. I got it. I'm good. I appreciate it. But what we're really saying is I'm soaking this in and I'm dealing with
Mm.
this on my own because either I don't have anyone that I can trust with this, or I'm
Yes.
not willing to trust anyone with this.
Mm. Mm. Man, this is man, you said some rich stuff. And thank you for sharing because you didn't have to. But this is
Oh,
a
absolutely,
conversation we
man.
have. Um, well, let me ask you this question. We had one question, panel, actually from my wife. She said, at what point did you start to be or were comfortable enough to be vulnerable? This is a good question. When you were dating she meant wife. She said wives, but I know she meant wife
Hmm.
because you only have one wife. The, that's funny. Yes. At what point did you start to be or work to be or were comfortable enough to be vulnerable when you were dating your wife and compare it then to now after being married for a while? That's a good question.
Absolutely. We're 10 years in, and I'm
Mhm.
still learning. I'm still
Wow.
opening up. 10 years in, I'm still opening up. And that's
Mm.
the transparency that people won't give you. They'll give you all the BS and all the smoke and the mirrors of
Yeah.
life, sunshine, giggles, rainbows, and whatever from the sky. No, I'm
Mm.
still learning to open up. So, and it's amazing that when you're in pursuit, um, then you're more than willing to open up everything because you want something. You're
Mm.
after something. You desire something, right?
Yeah.
And the moment you capture that thing, we begin to dial it down. Why?
Mm.
Now it doesn't take as much, you know. So I think there's levels to it. I think that initially a lot of us are more willing to be open. That's why you can take the toughest, hardest, meanest dude you've ever seen in your life and put him next to his lady or put him next to his kid or put him next to a puppy dog and see what happens. Boom, wide open. As soon as that thing moves, boom, close right back. So I know for me, relationship wise, in the beginning, um, I was definitely a lot more open. As we grew closer together, I became more open. But I think that because I didn't know her, not to trust her, which is kind of opposite for some people, um,
Hmm.
I think I had experienced probably more damage from my family. Um, that I think that I felt more comfortable with those that I was just getting to know because I didn't
Yes.
feel like there was nothing that you had to take advantage of me with or
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
Um, so in the beginning, I was open. In the middle, I found myself closing back down. And now
Mm.
I'm finding myself opening back up.
So this is good because, and my wife, she corrected me. She said it's actually for both of you guys to answer. So she was asking
Oh,
me to
you go.
answer
I was about to say you go answer that question because you in the house.
the She said, "Wow." So I was like, "No," and she's an English teacher, so she was like, "No typo." I want both of you guys to answer. I think I would say almost similar as well. I think it's as you just said, it's always to some degree to trust somebody initially and share stuff with you where there's really no stake in the game per se, if you
Yeah,
will.
yeah,
It always becomes harder, I think, to be more vulnerable as your level of emotional investment increases because you feel like you have something to lose. And I think I felt um, it's still important for us, but you at this level, like, because it's funny, I'll be married 10 years, the end of July as well. And I think I feel more exposed now than I've ever felt
mm,
because my wife has so much information on me, so much data for what I've shared before that she could weaponize me. She could weaponize what she knows about me and destroy my whole sense of security, if you will, identity, because that is what vulnerability is. You expose yourself to risk. It's always
right.
a risk when you're being vulnerable. And so we've definitely had, if I don't really consider you to be really in your marriage or really invested in your marriage, if you had said something that you don't regret or said something to your spouse that they shared with you before, possibly that you try to insert some way into an argument. Hey, it was a little jab. Sometimes they're big jabs, sometimes they're little jabs. I've done it before. I'm a counselor, I'm a therapist, I work with couples. I know not to do that, and I've still done it because when we have our vulnerability threatened, our
Mm,
natural instinct is to protect ourselves, to
mm-hmm,
put up that guard. And the only way we know to do that is with words in
right.
a lot of ways, or like you said, stonewalling. And so, it's funny, I think this is true in platonic relationships as well. One of the four predictors of divorce that John Gottman talks about in his book, The Marriage Clinic. And he says, if these four things exist in a marital relationship, they kind of can predict the signs of divorce. There's stonewalling, defensiveness, contempt, and criticism. So
Mm,
stonewalling is that, like you said, that withdrawing, we're not going to have no discussion. I'm just going to shut down. Defensiveness is, somebody says something and you just about to jump on them, react. Contempt is that just sense of disgust, um, that sense of disgust about who you are as a person. And then criticism, obviously, is the um, just a constant critique. And I think if you have those elements in any relationship growing consistently, or even if it's just one of them growing consistently, there is going to be a um, indirect correlation. So as one of those increases, you'll find oftentimes the vulnerability decreasing. And
absolutely.
when those things are not present, most often vulnerability will increase because people feel safe. And I think this is really important, especially for us as husbands, is to create that emotional safety, especially for our wives. And so this is another lesson I think, Kenny, which is I'm glad where my wife raised this question, is that oftentimes as men, especially for those of us who take our task of leading our homes um, the way God wants us to as husbands, is that one of the things that we need to lead in is being vulnerable. It's
Mm,
more. It is definitely, I think, easier for our wives to do that by nature, but we got to lead out in that too. And it's just like when I was first hit with that, what I guess you would call a revelation, but insight, um, that I need to be leading in vulnerability to make my wife feel safe to even open up more. I was like, man, no, I don't know about that. Like, I'm gonna do my work, but come on now. And so vulnerability is just so important, and we don't realize, especially for men, how we can just really change an environment, but our own vulnerability when we walk into different environments, we can really change the, if you will, the atmosphere by leading out. And because sometimes, depending on what type of presence that you have, people are automatically guarded, especially if you're a man, when you walk into certain spaces. But when you are able to come in and yes, have a powerful presence, but you're able to be transparent and be vulnerable, it disarms people. And we both know this, that, and I've seen you demonstrate this so much in your talks, is that you just disarm people with your transparency and your story. And once you disarm them, you have them. It's like you can go through your presentation because they're already like, oh man, I can trust this guy. We
right.
identify, we're connected, and that only happens in response to vulnerability taking place in um, in the engagement or the conversation that you're having with someone. Man,
Absolutely, man. And like I said before, name a leader that wasn't vulnerable.
mm,
You can't do it. You cannot do it. Name a good leader that I didn't say somebody in authority. I said name a good leader that wasn't vulnerable. You can start
yes,
from the top. Go straight to Jesus. Go straight to him. Everything about him was vulnerability. All of it, you know.
yes,
But from vulnerable and take it down to man's level. Look at Gandhi, look at Mother Teresa, look at Malcolm, Martin, Maya Angelou. There's not a single one that wasn't willing to open themselves up to something in pursuit of something, And
absolutely.
like you said, somebody's you got to be a proton, like somebody's got to go first.
Hmm.
And I often tell students that we are icebreaker ships, not paddle boats. The difference there is icebreaker ships are willing to go into those cold, dark places by themselves, out into the deep dark, and they're willing to go slow and methodically break through the ice so that others can come behind them smoother and faster. But paddle boats are just about leisure and fun, and a lot of us don't realize that we're all in the ice. And
Yes.
some of us are choosing to be on paddle boats right now, and that is not the time. It is not the
And it's
time. You're
not,
gonna freeze to death out there, and someone's gonna hop out of that water and go eat your behind. So
man.
I think, like you said, um, that there are different ways that thing manifests in us, and a point that you made a minute ago with you said your wife has so much on you. The only reason she has so much on you is because she has proven herself. I'm gonna use this word intentionally. She's
Yeah.
proven herself worthy
Yeah.
um, to be entrusted with your heart. You
Hmm.
can't trust everybody with your heart. You can't
Absolutely.
trust everybody with your truth. You can't. I don't advise it. You know,
Yes.
we all need people that we can confide in and can lean completely on. For a period
Mhm.
of time. Um, but the reason she has so much is because you've given so much,
Yeah.
and the only reason you've given so much is because you trust her. And I
Yeah.
saw a quote a long time ago, and I can't remember who said it, but they were talking about children, but I still believe it relates to adults as well. They said if anybody ever lies to you, it's because they don't trust you. And it's
Mm.
so interesting. Isn't that so interesting? Because it feels like it's
Uh,
backwards. It
yes.
it
Yes.
feels like if I'm the one lying to you, then you can't trust me. But it's actually the other way around.
Way
I'm
around.
lying
I
to
agree
you
with you
because I
wholeheartedly.
don't trust you. If I trusted you, I'll tell you I just robbed that bank,
Yeah.
right?
If
If
I
I
thought
trusted
you
you, exactly. If I trusted you, I'd say, you know what? Yeah, I just did this or that. Doesn't mean
mm,
you're proud of it, but it
yeah.
does mean that you're not dealing with shame with that person,
Yeah.
which is
Yes.
why I think that prayer, and just our ability to go to God with things, that's why we can talk to him the way that we do. To
Yeah.
come boldly before the throne of grace, man. Why? Because we're able to unload, and we don't have to put our guard up immediately.
Yes.
Um, but we're humans, and it's understandable that you
Mm,
don't want to dump everything on somebody because information still has to be processed, good
yes.
or bad. And if
Yes.
you get a bunch of good information, it still takes energy out of your mind, body, and soul to get that thing, processed and put into its right place. So the
Mm,
reason she knows so much about you is because you gave her so much, and you gave her so much because you trust her so much.
yeah. Kenny, what would you say to a brother right now who's listening and they want to improve on their vulnerability and they're trying to figure out how they can do that? Um, what would be your, based off your own experience and what you studied and what you know and what you've learned, what would be your encouragement to them in this moment?
Sit down with yourself first.
Mm,
Uh, Cut off your TV, cut off music. Um, if you
mm,
need to, sit in a partially lit room, whatever the case may be. Find a place where you can be quiet, just
wow.
with yourself, and ask yourself the question: Who am I? Who
Mm,
am I? Where am I trying to go? If I'm trying to go here and I desire to go here, what's holding me back? What is
mm,
in me right now? What's in my control? Because I believe in controlling the controllables. So one of the first things I would say to him um, is to look at the things that are within your grasp and
yeah.
begin to move on those things. Don't be afraid of the wall, because what's on the opposite side of that wall is freedom. But you can't
Yeah.
go around that wall. You can't go over the wall. You can't go under the wall. You have to go
Mm,
through the wall. You've got to rip it down, because you're the one that built it up. And that's not to say that you didn't build it up to to safeguard yourself. It's
mhm,
understandable. You're human, just
yeah.
like me. I've had
Yeah.
plenty of walls. There's walls that I'm still tearing down.
Yeah.
But the very first thing I would say is self-reflection. And then I would say, um, do a friendship, do a relationship, do a family inventory or audit,
That's
if you
good.
will. And when I say audit, I mean literally get a sheet of paper and write down the four
This is
people
so good,
that
Kenny.
you believe you can trust the most. Write down the qualities that make them trustworthy. What is it about them that
Mm.
attracts you to them? I don't care if it's your sister, if it's your brother, if it's your next door neighbor, or your coworker, or your
Yeah.
colleague. Who is it, and why do you trust them? And from there, how much can you trust them?
Yes.
And once you answer that question, are you willing to give them a snippet of what it is that you really want to share? Because you don't want to come and just drop something on someone, but
There
you
you
can
go.
start small and be intentional. Hey, you know what, man? Next time somebody asks you, how are you doing? Answer the question. Don't breeze it. Answer the question. Hey, how are you doing?
Hmm.
If you're having a tough time, give them a snippet and see how they respond. So if they say, hey man, how are you doing? Make sure, number one, that if somebody asks you, how are you doing? They don't keep on walking. If somebody
That's
asks you, how are
good.
you doing? They keep on walking. They're just saying hi. That's not the kind of person I'm talking about. If
Hmm.
somebody says, how are you doing? And they wait for an answer, that's at least a yellow light to start moving forward. And from there, you
Yes.
can say, you know what, man, I'm doing okay, but I'm having a bit of a rough time. If they ask
Mm.
a follow-up question, really, tell me about it. Then you can
Man, it's
decide how far you want to go from there, right? Aside from that, I would also say, um, to make sure you understand that you don't have to hold on to your guilt or your shame of yesterday's mistakes, faults, or failures.
wow. Wow.
You cannot drive a car forward looking in the rearview mirror. Not effectively. You're going to crash into something. And too often we as men, we find ourselves doing this number, but
Mm.
we're going 100 miles an hour down the highway
Yes.
looking behind us.
Mm.
And sometimes we're looking back to see if anything's chasing us.
Hmm.
Sometimes we're looking back to see if anyone's coming to support us or help us.
Wow.
And sometimes we're looking back because we're wanting a reference point for our past success. But
Mm.
again, you can't hold on to a 2006 success and you're thinking you're going to move into 2021 with that same
Wow.
thing. I told somebody this
Say
earlier in the
again.
year. I said a 2019 effort won't get you a 2020 championship, right? So
It
you
will
you could
not.
have killed it. You could have killed it in 2019. Good for you.
Hmm.
I love it. Congratulations on your gold medal. But your
Hmm.
opponents have readjusted their strategy and they're coming for you full speed in 2020. So
Wow.
you have to be able to sit down, look at yourself for who you are. Don't crush yourself. Build yourself up first. And I'll say
Mm.
this, and I'll give it back to you, James, that men, you gotta know. You gotta. It's something I learned years ago. You gotta know that your subconscious, your internal conversation, does not understand when you're being sarcastic, you're joking, or whatever else. That's why dreams wake you up and you're in a cold sweat because your
Yes.
brain says, "Oh shoot, a dog is chasing me. Oh shoot,
Mhm.
somebody's trying to harm me." So be very careful of what you say to yourself day in and day out because it's going to be very, very difficult for you to move forward when you're cutting the legs out from yourself first. And we're looking at everybody else saying, man, people are tearing me down. People are tearing me down. What are you saying to yourself? Because as Pastor Lockett used to say, the me I see is the me I'll be. When you
To me,
look in the mirror, what are you seeing? You cannot
mm,
look in a broken mirror and expect a complete image. It's not going to be there. It's going to be
mm.
fractured glass. It's going to give you a glimpse of who you are, and you're going to find yourself trying to work your way into those crevices and those cracks. And that's not the way you're built to be. You need to know that you are able to let go of things. You're able to move forward from things. You're not inerrant. We all make mistakes.
Mhm.
But I would say, man, know that you are worth the fight and that you're loved, even if nobody else tells you you're valuable. So don't give up on yourself.
Man, that was so like I should like package that and then put a whole nother that could be a whole nother episode in itself. Just those brief comments. And especially the last one, this our self-talk is like so important because as I often say, the most important person that we talk to every day is ourself. And we're both psychology majors, so we love talking about the impact of our subconscious mind. And while we're talking about that, I want to say, man, there are a couple of things. The gift that I actually have to share with you tonight, it's called 5 Days to Your Best You. And in those days, I pretty much walk you through five mindset practices to help you position your mind, position your beliefs in a way that helps you to accomplish your purpose. And one of those days, would you know it, Kenny, is on self-talk, because I really believe if we don't improve our self-talk, especially like you said, the me I see, the me I be, that whatever way you consistently think about, we will eventually become. And because our subconscious, you said it so perfectly, it doesn't distinguish between reality and imagination. So whatever we're saying to ourselves, our subconscious over time, when we say to ourselves repeatedly, it interprets those things as beliefs, and it says, oh, they keep saying this to themselves, so this must be important. So I'm going to hardwire that stuff into my subconscious. Think about it like a computer. I'm going to hardwire that information into my hard drive, because again, the brain is set up for efficiency and productivity. So it doesn't want to keep thinking about the same things over and over. So it just hardwires that information, and we act out of what is in our subconscious, which is why for most of us, our daily routine is already set to some degree because we're acting off of our subconscious. Um, Second thing is, man, and we'll talk about this. Actually, what I want to encourage you guys to do is the Shameless Leader podcast. I did a 5 episode series on shame, because you brought it up, and of course I'm the shameless leader. Uh, and my wife was right. That is my kryptonite. You can get me talking into a whole nother conversation about that. But I know you just can't talk about men without talking about shame. And like you said, shame is really what you said, that sense of not being enough. And, shame, as I say, it likes to drive two tapes. It likes to drive one tape, which is I am not enough. And if you kind of overcome that tape, the second tape that it puts in is, who do you think you are? So if you get over that first one, he tries to put that imposter syndrome on you, like, who do you think you are? Like, you had this history, you done this, you done that. And it does that to try to sabotage your progress. And so, and especially for men, like you said, because we get our sense of security by accomplishing tasks. Our subconscious, shame and subconscious can be a deadly force if we're not careful. And this is why what me and Kenny are talking about tonight, vulnerability, is very important, because if you don't open up and process these things, you will crash. It's not a matter of if you will crash, it's only a matter of when. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So if you have been listening tonight, let me make sure I have oh yes, that what my brother said, that was strong, boy. That was strong. Thank you, Shanga, man. Shanga has always been a consistent supporter. Thank you, brother, for listening. And so two things I want
Wilson.
you to check out what we have below. James Perkins That'll Help Wellness Gift. You'll get a link for you to get that course, which is valued at $200, but it's a free gift on tonight. And then there is something that I'll be rolling out over the next couple of months called Bros in Therapy. And so if you are a brother who's been listening tonight and you're having questions about vulnerability and things related to just men, and you want to talk about it and process it, I want you to go also to Bros in Therapy, subscribe to our mailing list, and then we'll be sending out information in the coming weeks, if you will, how you can engage with us. And you'll probably see Kenny Wilson. I haven't even asked him, but you'll probably see Kenny Wilson on that on that platform as well, as we continue to talk about this. And so I'm so glad again that you've attended tonight. Make sure again, even if you listen to this by replay, let us know where you're chiming in from. And please share this. This conversation is so rich. Usually I try to go for 45 minutes, but I couldn't cut this out because it was just too powerful. I'm like, every brother, probably every woman needs to hear this, because you probably, sisters, you probably have some brothers in your circle who will benefit from this. Some of them you're thinking about dating, but you're like, I think
I
they
ain't
need to
sure.
get more maturity. Send this to them tonight. They won't even know that you even set them up. But send this to them. Well, they may know now since I've already dropped the dime on them. But Kenny, man, thank you so very much, brother, for attending tonight. Thank you for your vulnerability, your transparency, and man, we appreciate you so very much, brother.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. All right, friends, thank you again for your attendance. We will see you on next week. Be safe, friends. Peace.